Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We'll get started in about 3 or 4 minutes, just to let folks come into the room and join the space. Thank you for tuning in today. And for those folks that are in the room already, if you wouldn't mind using the chat just to tell us where you're from, what institution or organization you are situated at, and then what your role is within fundraising. I'd be curious to know while we wait for others to join. See everyone. And thank you again for tuning in today for today's fundraising fireside chat with Dr. Marybeth Gasman. We'll get started at 5 after the hour. And for those folks that just joined us after I made the announcement, if you wouldn't mind putting into the chat where you're tuning in from, what your institution or organization is, and what your role is within fundraising. We'd love to know what brought you here. Good to see you, Evelyn. Good to see everyone. Lauren from Stevens Point, good to see you. Joy, good to see you again. Thank you for tuning in. Victoria from Prince George's Community College, my neighborhood actually, so it's good to see you. Glad we're staying local as well as reaching our HBCUs and other institutions. Rutgers, good to see everyone here. Thank you all for joining. I'll get started in about 2 minutes or so. Wonderful seeing all the folks from Prince George's Community College. We have Talladega represented. Joni, good to see you. We appreciate you for being here from SEI. Love some familiar names and faces. Really appreciate today's time, or everyone's time, and you all being here. We hope to have a really great presentation and conversation from Dr. Marybeth Gasman. So I will get started. So welcome everyone to today's UNCF Fundraising Fireside Series. This is essentially a webinar series that we do with subject matter experts across the field of philanthropy. So today's presentation is titled Storytelling, Data, and Innovation as Tools for Fundraising Success. And this session will explore how storytelling, data, and innovation can be useful and powerful tools for fundraising success. You all will learn how to craft compelling narratives, leverage data-driven insights, and embrace innovative strategies to engage donors and maximize impact. So through practical examples that Dr. Gasman will share today, we will uncover ways to inspire action and build lasting support for your institution or your organization's mission. So thank you for joining us today. Just a couple of housekeeping rules before we get started in today's presentation. I wanted to make sure that everyone is aware that we are going to be recording this presentation. So for the folks that weren't able to join us, if they registered, they'll have access to it, as well as you all that are here today. You'll have access to the session, and you'll get that later this week. If you feel comfortable to do so, we do appreciate when folks are able to turn their cameras on so that we feel like we are building a sense of community. And if you aren't talking, please make sure that your mic is muted so that we don't get any feedback audio from the presenter speaking. And if you do have a question, we're going to hold questions until the end, but please feel free to put them into the chat so that we are able to take note of them for Dr. Gasman. And at the end, we'll have an opportunity for you all to raise your questions there, as well as unmute your microphone to ask her questions directly. And as always, we appreciate and we love feedback. So if you would stick around to complete our evaluation form, that really allows us to get a sense and understanding of what's most valuable to you, as well as what you saw value for today's presentation. And then lastly, we ask that you, join us on LinkedIn to continue the conversation so that we are building a community over on LinkedIn and on social as well. So I just wanted to introduce myself. So my name is Geneva Dampere. I serve as the Director of Strategy and Operation within UNCF's Teaching and Learning Center. And within the Teaching and Learning Center, we have the Philanthropy Institute, and I'll talk a little bit more briefly about that later. But I wanted to introduce our speaker today. So I'm very excited that we have Dr. Marybeth Gasman here with us today. Dr. Marybeth Gasman is the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Endowed Chair in Education, Distinguished Professor, and an Associate Dean for Research at Rutgers University. She leads the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Institute for Leadership, Equity, and Justice and the Rutgers Center for Minority Serving Institutions. Dr. Gasman has authored or edited 35 books, including HBCU, The Power of Historically Black Colleges and Universities, which was published last year. She has written and published over 300 peer-reviewed articles and 650 opinion pieces, earning recognition as one of Education Week's 30 most influential education scholars. She has secured over $24 million in grant funding to support research and mentorship at minority-serving institutions. And as a dedicated educator, she has mentored more than 85 doctoral students, receiving the University of Pennsylvania's Provost Award for Distinguished Ph.D. Teaching and Mentoring. Dr. Gasman has served on the Board of Trustees for the College Board and several HBCUs, including Paul Quinn College, Morris Brown College, and St. Augustine. Outside of academia, she is a passionate writer and photographer who values balance and lifelong learning. So we really appreciate that. And we appreciate you, Dr. Gasman, for being here and for taking your time out to share this presentation with us today. So next slide, please, Christine. So just to give a bit of an overview of the Philanthropy Institute. So our goal within the Philanthropy Institute is to support fundraising and advancement across HBCUs and with mission-aligned organizations that serve the communities that we serve. So we are really excited that in 2023, we were able to launch the Philanthropy Institute as a resource, a safe haven, and a beacon for fundraising and advancement on our campuses. So some of you are a part of our member institutions at 37 private HBCUs across the country. And for those that are not, you still have access and resources or opportunities to get the resources that we are able to serve here. So luckily, the Fundraising Firesides is a relatively new opportunity that we have to convene folks together to learn and engage with one another and to really collaborate on some necessary information that would be pertinent for fundraisers in the 21st century. So we're very excited about this webinar series and that you were able to participate in today's session. And we hope that you will join us for the future sessions that we have on a monthly basis. So with that, I will pass it to Dr. Gasman for today's presentation.
Great. Well, Geneva, thank you so much. I appreciate that really warm welcome. And if you can go to the next slide, be great. So welcome, everyone. It's great to spend some time here with you today. I am going to kind of go over a few things, and then I'm hoping that you'll have some questions. Happy to answer questions. What I'm going to talk about today is I want to explore how storytelling and data and innovation can really transform fundraising, especially within culturally diverse communities. I will use HBCU examples as I'm talking, but I think that there's always so much to learn from HBCUs, and also many of the examples I'm going to give could be used anywhere. So as I'm doing this, I'm going to draw from a variety of things. I saw that someone said I'm a scholar in the chat, and I am. I'm a professor, and I love being a professor. A long time ago, I was a professional fundraiser when I was much younger, so I have done that. And then, of course, because I run a center and an institute, I actually do quite a bit of fundraising, not only grant writing, but I also do a lot of individual fundraising and friend raising and all of those things. And then I'm also going to draw a bit from my research, although this is definitely not a research talk, but I do think you'll see that I'm an advocate for including data in fundraising, and part of that is because I am a researcher, but friendly data, nothing too complex that people can't engage with. So you can see here, these are some of the things that I'm hoping that you'll come away with as we're talking today. So if you can go to the next slide. All right, so I want to talk about storytelling in fundraising, and I always, ask the question, or people ask me the question, why do stories matter? I am a historian by training, so I love telling stories, and I love the art of stories, and I think it really lends itself to the HBCU community because there are so many rich stories. And the reason why they matter is because people connect with stories on an emotional level. And as I've got a lot of fundraisers here, I'm hoping that you know that really, it's really the story that ends up being what resonates with people. When we tell stories that are authentic and also, I think, culturally relevant, and it could be whatever culture that you're working with or group of cultures that you're working with, defined very broadly, we can create very deep donor engagement. And so, the way that I try to think about a fundraising story is that it has some essential elements, and those include a relatable protagonist. Okay, so this could be a student, this can be a faculty member, it can be an alum, it could be somebody in the community, a leader whose journey is very compelling and connects with your institution. But the best stories have this relatable protagonist in them. And then I think the best stories, and I'm talking about fundraising stories here, but these would be stories in general. So if you have stories that you watch on Netflix or something, it's going to be the same thing. The best stories have a challenge that requires support. And those challenges are rooted in the experiences of people. And in the case of HBCUs, that would be in the experiences of Black people, right? And others that HBCUs support, because as we all know, HBCUs are incredibly diverse institutions. So you have to have a challenge that requires support. And then the last thing that a story has is a really clear resolution. So you want to show how the impact of donors and their support can change the educational experience, can enhance opportunity, and can foster equity. And those are some of the most important things that we can do when we are trying to use stories in fundraising. So I also think it's really important, in the case of HBCUs in particular, I think this is really, really important, that we should be teaching people as we ask them for financial support. So one of the things that I would always do is and because I've been on boards of trustees at Black colleges, I have been someone who's asked people to support Black colleges as well. So one of the things I always do is spend some time really making sure that I am telling the story and that I am teaching as I'm making a request. I'm never going to ask people for money to support anything without having a really clear story that exemplifies what I'm asking for. So, and I'm going to give you an example of something that I was just thinking about using the other day. So the other day I was visiting Fisk University, which is one of my very, very favorite institutions in the country. For me, it was the very first HBCU that I ever visited when I was 24 years old, and dean of the graduate school, and one of their professors, who's a physics professor, his name is Kent Wallace, is one of my oldest and dearest friends since I was 17 years old. And I went over to visit him recently because I was in Nashville, and I visited he runs the Fisk rocket program. And so while I was there, I was looking all around the rocket lab, and I decided to take my phone out, snap some photos of him near the rockets, talking about the program, talking about all the students that he's inspired, and just, really kind of capturing the moment. And I mainly because I'm probably going to write something about it, but I started thinking about, like, that is the type of story that is really remarkable, right? Here's a faculty member with this highly interactive program. He's got a hugely diverse group of young people who are interested in physics and rockets. And what a way to get more and more people interested in what is happening at Fisk. So that's an example of how you can, you've got this professor, you've got the students, you've got a unique but highly sought after kind of activity happening, and it's incredibly visual. So I started thinking a lot about, like, how that could make such a great fundraising story. And I do know that Fisk uses that story, because when I was on the campus, I happened to step into the advancement office and I looked down at a magazine on a table in the advancement office, and there was the magazine with the Fisk rocket program on the cover. So they're definitely using that story. I think you can also use stories of first generation students who've overcome financial barriers as a result of scholarships, like specific scholarships. And what you want to do is you want to show the donor that their funding and their financial support has been used in the most effective ways as part of that solution, right? So you've got all the different parts, but you're always going to show that there's a clear resolution, a clear solution that's happening. All right, so we'll go to the next slide. So stories are very powerful, but data also can completely reinforce the credibility of your stories. And what it does is it provides proof of impact. It builds trust because people, they have a good sense that what they're being told is true. And then it can also personalize many of the donor appeals that you have. You can use data to personalize them. So what I did is I tried to think about some key types of data to leverage, but as we're moving forward, I'm going to try to push you to think about as many types of data as you can. I mean, I think some of the most obvious types of data have to do with student metrics. So, of course, graduation rates, sometimes you're going to use those if they've gone up. And other times you're going to say, we're dealing with a lower graduation rate and we really need support in order to increase those. We know what to do, but we need funding to do that. I think that some other obvious ones include job placement stats. Those are really, really important these days because people, especially policymakers and lawmakers, they want to know that people are going to get a career after they go to college. Unfortunately, people doubt that higher education makes a difference these days, and which is mind-boggling to me, especially because I'm the only one in my family who has a college education, and it has fundamentally changed my life and allowed me to do good things for my family. So those things are important, right? Showing the success that you have in placing people across a whole variety of spectrums. So I see a lot of people talk about that with regard to the sciences, but you also want to talk about that with regard to the humanities, maybe some of the new technologies that are out there, really emphasizing that. And then, of course, you want to be keeping track of scholarship recipients' outcomes. That's really important as well, so that you can show the direct impact when you are telling those stories. I think that it's incredibly important to gather statistics also on the institutional impact. Now, an organization like the UNCF does this regularly, which is great. And you want to use those, but you also want to have your own institutional data that you're collecting. So, really take a look at all of the community engagement programs that you have and capture that and be able to talk to people about that community engagement. If you get really, really good at that, you might think about applying for like the Carnegie classification elective that's focused on community engagement, because that can really help provide a data point and kind of that proof that you're doing that work. So that I was just thinking about that as something that I think HBCUs in particular are so good at and should be rewarded for that immense community engagement. You want to think about your research and your teaching advances. So if you're doing really innovative things in the classroom and you can quantify those or qualify those with data, you want to focus on those. If you have any research advancements, I see HBCUs out in front on research all of the time, not always getting the credit for that. So capture that and be able to put that in your stories. And then, one of the things that ends up being so important is the economic contributions of HBCUs. Again, UNCF is really good at capturing that on a national level, but you want to be capturing that on a city level and on a state level. And this isn't, there are other folks in here who are from institutions other than HBCUs. You should always be doing this as much as you can. Now, sometimes people will say to me, well, we just don't have the resources to do that. Okay. And I feel that because I run a small center that has about a $2 million budget a year that we work off of, mainly to pay salaries for our staff. But one of the things that we do is that we engage students and we engage people who are looking for experience. So one of the things you can do to gain this knowledge about the economic contributions or the community engagement is there might be students who are interested in doing dissertations. There might be I love to engage with work study students because the federal government pays for half of their pay. I tend to think that they are absolutely terrific to work with. Right now we have 4 work study students. They're absolutely great. I'm going to talk a little bit more about engaging them later, but they also are looking for research experience. So this is another way that you can, for not that much money, be able to capture some of these things. Especially you could also reach out to faculty who want assignments for their students in classes, ask them to adopt your project. So maybe as the class project, they decide to do like a mini consulting project where they look into economic contributions or they look into community engagement, or they do an assessment of innovative research at your institution. I personally have adopted problems that HBCUs have come to me with and asked, and my class decided to be mini consultants, and they all got their names listed on a consultant report, and they found it really exciting to do work in real time. So those are just some ideas in case you do not have a well built out institutional research arm, because not everybody does. Or you don't have like all of the programs that you can use to kind of get this data. I also think you should be tracking alumni achievements, not just famous alumni, but everyday alumni. Everyday alumni are like your bread and butter, right? Those stories are the most powerful stories. Leadership roles, get somebody to keep track of all the leaders that you have out there across all different types of venues. And then, of course, you also want to keep track of alumni who are giving philanthropically at different levels. And so all of that data can help you in order to tell the best stories, persuade donors. So one example I was thinking of is I worked with an institution where we tried to an HBCU. We were really trying to take a look at the specific impact of scholarship funding. So they had scholarships that were geared. The funder wanted to, an individual donor wanted to gear the scholarships toward first generation students. That's what they were interested in. And the school wanted to thank the donor for doing this. And so what they did is they collected data on every single one of those students and what was happening as a result. Their retention rates, their graduation rates, some of them that were funded by the donor. This was a large donation. So funded by the donor had already graduated, and they were able to provide the donor with all of that information. Now they gave it to the individual donor, but the other thing they did was create a whole story about the impact of that kind of donation. So that's how you can kind of, the numbers are undeniable in those stories, and that's how you can make your stories a little bit more, a little bit richer. So we're going to go to the next slide. All right, so talk a little bit about some innovations. Some of these you might already be doing. I don't know what everyone's doing at their institution, so I tried to kind of put together as many as I could think of. And these things are evolving. They're very quick. Sometimes they're in style and then they're gone, right? It's just that kind of can happen. So I try to encourage people, and many of these things we're doing at our own center and I do at our institute because we don't have a lot of fundraising money. I don't have any money to fundraise, and I also don't have I don't have a lot of marketing money. So we try to do a lot of things that are free. So peer-to-peer fundraising is really, really important, where you can have peers telling authentic stories of why they have to be authentic. They can't be like kind of marketing speak. You need people to be able to talk the way they talk. And so peer-to-peer, peers asking peers is really, really important. You need to be telling your story as much as possible across all of the social media platforms. But I will say, and I heard Genevieve say this early on, that you have a LinkedIn community. I will say, with the politicization of many social media platforms these days, LinkedIn has it has become a completely different place, and it has much more engagement now. It tends to be very professional engagement. I think that people are seeing more of what we're doing on LinkedIn than they ever were before. I never used to use LinkedIn, and I use it all the time now. Please follow me on LinkedIn. I would love that. I'll follow you back, and I'm happy to promote the things that you are doing. I think we should all be very generous, especially in these times, but just in general. So one thing I did before putting this together is I really took a look at I looked at all the HBCUs and what was going on their social media. Okay. So I do this quite often, but some people haven't posted, their institutions haven't posted for a long time. Others are posting every day. Like, if you take a look at some of the accounts, they're just really, really active. And I looked across, but some people aren't using them at all. And this is a big loss, right? Because it's free. And the biggest thing that you can do here is get as much action as possible. I will also say this is an area where you can tap into students. I have 4 students that we have a communication team that thinks through all of the campaigns, but the students actually help us to tweak them and make them really innovative. So if you have work study students, this gives them a great opportunity. They can put it on their resume, especially if they're in communication, marketing, design, and then employ them in that area and really get them doing innovative things, right? Things that, like, I'm 57, I'm not going to think of them, but they are. I have a 25-year-old daughter. She thinks of the most amazing things to do with regard to social media. Another thing that you can do is you can use chatbots to really kind of have, if you have a website where it allows a chatbot, you can have that gather information on who's engaging, where they're engaging, how long they're lingering on pages, right? All of that can help you, and it can also gather information about them, and you can be able to engage with them. There are some free programs to do that. There are also some very expensive programs, but I would use the free ones. Another thing that I would do, and you have to be comfortable with this, but you can take a program like ChatGPT or Gemini or Apple Intelligence, any of those, and you can take your, some of the information that you have about your alumni and put it in there, and then ask it to give you insight on your alumni based on their age. Okay. So if they're Gen X, if they're millennials, if they're baby boomers. I'm trying to remember all the new ones. But you can have it sort of segment for you and then and have it look at your institutional website, have it look at your institutional goals, and really have it build sort of pitches for various people. Of course, you'll have to go over them yourself, but this is a free tool that's available to you. So I would also do that. I think that anytime you have homecoming or large gatherings, you should be doing mobile texting. You can even set up, I have gamification on here too. You can even set up challenges where you're doing texts that challenge different years to give, that challenge. You can have people promise to give gifts depending on the scores of football games. There's all different things that you can do with sort of the gamification of mobile texting, but you should never be having these events without some kind of mobile, like, text to give programs happening. I think sometimes I've seen lots of amazing homecomings, but there's no fundraising aspect to it. So try your best to do that. And then the last thing I wanted to say in this regard is there are two things that I think are really interesting that you can do. You can do subscription-based giving, where people who give in this regard get little extras. So they might get like a really cool interview with an author who graduated from the institution, or maybe the president, but it can't be like presidential speak. It needs to be like real down-to-earth fireside chat kind of thing. Or it could be, someone who's a prominent alum. You can kind of give them these special experiences. And then the other thing I was going to say is that I've been doing a lot of this lately where I'll have an event and then I throw in a little extra at the end of the event. So um, sometimes it's me wanting to just kind of warm up the relationship that I have with potential donors. And like right now, that could be because people are feeling uncertain. Sometimes people are feeling afraid. People are feeling powerless. One of the things that I've been doing is really reminding people of the power that they have, right? Or sometimes when I'm talking to young people, I might be reminding them about how they define who they are, that other people don't get to define them. And so what I'm doing is I'm trying to kind of warm up any events that I have and show the humanity of our institution, of what we're doing. That really helps when you go to people in the future. And I do a lot of that. I do that in person, but I also do that in online events. I think that's really important. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. And on this slide, I just really carefully, I put this in here basically because I know that you're going to get the slides and the talk. And so I wanted you to have this, but this is kind of how you apply this all together, right? And I know that you know some of this, but for me, it's about identifying the audience and really thinking about the cultural connections that you have to the audience. I think for HBCUs, the historical connections are really important, but you also have to have the current connections. Like the historical connections are not enough anymore. So incredibly important. Making sure, as I said, that you craft a data-driven narrative, emotionally compelling narrative, that you try to expand your reach as much as possible. So many institutions are doing really great things, but nobody knows about it. And so you want to use the social media, you want to use YouTube to get like video testimonials out there. Don't just put them on your website. Make sure that they're out there for everyone to see. Put them all across your social media. You want to be able to and again, I'm going to kind of hammer on this a bit, just be as authentic as possible in these messages. I think when you're not authentic, people can tell. And then the big thing with doing all of this is you've got to kind of be constantly measuring and refining your strategy. So you got to be looking at the metrics and seeing if something works. And I'll talk more about this, but if something isn't working, you can try it for a little while, but if it's not working, don't continue it. Like sometimes I have to stop things, right? Because they just don't work. And so you definitely want to be constantly looking at what you're doing and create campaigns that are not only inspiring, but also have concrete and tangible results. Because if they don't, then it's not a good use of your time. It's not a good use of money. Okay, so I want you, we'll go to the next slide. And Before I talk, I forgot to say I wanted to thank an artist, Chloe Epstein, who did all of the art for my talk today. Um, so I want you just to think for a few minutes, and you can feel free to put anything in the chat if you want. I think it's really good to be generous. I know that everybody's fundraising, but it's good to be generous. So if you have answers, I'm going to ask you to put them in the chat. So I think it's important to reflect on what you're doing. And if you're thinking about a fundraising campaign that you're working on or one you're hoping to launch, try to ask yourself these kinds of questions. So what story can you tell that authentically reflects your institution and student impact? Like if I were to ask you that right now, what would be the first thing that rolls off your tongue? What would be the first story that you would think of? And like for me, if somebody asks me that about my center, I can think of a lot of stories, but I don't want to bombard them with a lot of stories. I want to have one or two that roll right off my tongue, right? So if you were to ask me that, one of the first stories I would tell you about is I would tell you about our presidential preparation program that we have, that and the fact that we've now produced, in a very short time, 9 presidents of minority serving institutions, and that we have 75 aspiring leaders in that program who have all advanced at least 2 positions since being in the program. Now, that's not necessarily due to us, but we are helping, right? So you want to have a story that authentically reflects what you're doing. So if you have any of those, want to put them in the chat, that's fine. And then the next thing that you're going to want to do is think about all of the data that you could support to use that. Now, did you notice that in my story, I mentioned some numbers, didn't I? I had those numbers immediately because I know those numbers. And the reason why I know those numbers is because we collect data on that program. And then the second thing is because I know funders are always asking me those numbers. Why are they asking for those numbers? Because they want to make sure that their money and their investment is having an impact. So think about that for a minute. What data can you use to support and persuade donors? And I would push yourself to really think about all the different types of data that you can use, because there's so many different things that your institutions are doing that you might not be capitalizing on. And then I want you to think about what are some really innovative strategies that can help you reach and engage your audience effectively. Okay. So over the years, I've had to try to think of like all different kinds of things to do. And I'm always reading about the newest things to do and then trying to think about how I can fit what we're doing into those new things. And what I have found is that the kind of the most innovative personal testimonies that I can get. So at all of the events that we do, I have students who are, our student workers, and our communication team walking around and interviewing people on the spot about what they are experiencing. Now, I use this in order to get people to come to the programs, but I also use this in order to raise money, right? And I not only have the interviews, but I also transcribe those interviews and I can use those in written form. I can use those in social media campaigns. I can use those when I apply for grant proposals. I can use those when I go and talk to individuals. And so this is a really great thing to do. And people on the spot are so excited to tell you if they're having a good time, way more excited than if you call them later, right? Like in the midst of their excitement, you're going to get just a completely different, authentic person. So that's a strategy that I use and continue to use. I also always, every single thing that we do, we ask for feedback on, and we ask for the good and the bad. And the feedback, and I have a little note that asks if I can use that feedback to promote the program or to garner more support for it. So those are some of the ways that I'm just constantly having like this cycle of information that I'm able to use to move us forward. And I would recommend that. Okay, so I hope you thought about those questions a little bit. I've got 2 more slides and then we'll open it up for, actually I have 1 more slide and then we'll open it up for questions. So I think one of the major things that I don't see people do is evaluating the effectiveness of their fundraising. And these are questions that I think you absolutely have to ask yourself. Now, what you are going to notice is that these are very similar to what I just asked you, but these are things that you need to be sitting down and talking with your staff about. And I don't know how often you do this because it does take a lot of extra time, but I actually schedule for, 3 to 4 times a year, just an open 2 hour brainstorming critique of all of what we do meeting. And these are so helpful. Now, you got one thing you have to do is you have to be willing to say, we're not going to jump on people for offering critique, and there's no bad idea. We're just going to write them down, right? And it's really hard to do that because you know what we tend to do? Oh, we can't afford that. We can't do that. That's not going to work. So what we do is just throw all the ideas out there and then really try to revamp what we're doing. So, I would sit down and I would say, as a team, where are all of our authentic stories that are going to engage people? And how can we get more of those stories? And how can we also make sure that they are actually not staged and not I write for Forbes, and whenever I interview people, I always have to say to them, please do not give me staged answers. You know what these are, right? They're the ones that you prepare in advance. What I want are the ones from the heart. And so ask your team, where are you getting those stories from the heart? And again, I think you'll get them in real time. The other thing that I think you should do is sit down and take about half an hour to generate a list of all the data points that you think you have at your institution. They can be at the student level, they can be in the classroom, they can be on your team. You should also think about the data points that your team makes up and the success that you have and how you can capture that success in data. I mean, you might even make like a cool infographic about your success with alumni, right? And then push that infographic out on social media. That's something that we do regularly. You could do a really cool infographic about your institution's research success, looking at, peer-reviewed work, new books, just things that regularly get people talking about the success of the institution. But I think you should be sitting down with your team and talking about every kind of way that you can go after that data. And then sit down and think to yourself, which tools are we using that are just not working anymore, that are out of date, aren't serving us well? And then which tools are we using that are good? And then this question is really important. What do we see other people using that we're not using, but we'd like to be using? And have we looked into the cost of that? Have we looked into cost sharing? Is there somebody that we could team up with who might be willing to help us? Like, I'll give you an example of something. Because I work at a big research university, we have access to all of these different programs typically that I don't necessarily have to pay for. So one of the things that I do regularly for people is say, hey, if you don't have a big communication budget, our team would be happy to design these social media blocks and help you design a campaign. And we'd also be happy to push it out for you as well. So I've done that for organizations like Fulbright, but I've also was just asked last week by an HBCU who told me, hey, we're having a really hard time attracting graduate students. Would you be willing to kind of help us come up with a campaign and push that out? So that is something that we do complimentary for people all the time. You can find people who will do those kinds of things with you. And I've had people do that for us, right? For things that we didn't know, or that we couldn't do, or we didn't have access to funding to do. So it's good to also think about leveraging all the partnerships and innovations that you can think of. You also in this meeting, you might think about like who you can survey to find out some data, to find out information that you can look at later and really be able to show the return on investment that you have. All right, so at the end of the day, and I'm kind of going to close this out now, we know that effective fundraising is first and foremost about building relationships. I know you all know that. It's really about fostering trust, incredibly important, and then showing donors that you are going to have an impact with their generosity. And I think, that follow through, as we know, that stewardship is so important, doesn't always happen. I can't tell you the number of times I've donated to things where nobody thanked me and nobody followed up. Really important. I think by using storytelling with data and trying to be as innovative as you can really create movements and campaigns, as I like to call them, not just fundraising campaigns, but also marketing, social media, all different kinds of campaigns that engage and hopefully at the end of the day end up transforming students' lives, because that's why we're all here. I always try to remind everybody that's why we're here, right? Because we're here for students. So I'll end there, and I think we have about 15 minutes left, 16 minutes left. And thank you so much for listening. I really, really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, so at this time, we are opening up for questions. Please feel free to pop them in the chat, or you can feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand if you have a question for Dr. Gasman, based on what we learned today, or if you just have any questions lingering more generally. Yes, Joy, go ahead.
Hey, good morning, and thank you so much. I haven't seen you since you were on campus at Johnson C. Smith about a decade ago.
Joy, it's kind of hard to hear you, just so you know.
Thank you so much. In the chat for my colleagues, but we really appreciated your presentation this morning.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I didn't hear that completely if there was a question, but oh, there we go, Joy. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Let's see. Oh, okay. So okay. So you're polling partner institutions and saying about Wealth Engine, right? I think that those prices, by the way, are individually negotiated. And what I've found out from people is that there's all different kinds of prices depending on the institution. So I do think that partnering is probably one of the very best things that you can do. I especially think that like institutions should try to partner on those things because they can be just incredibly expensive. So. Geneva, you want to call? Okay, great.
Yeah, so Dr. Henson, we'll go to you first, and then we'll go to the chat after.
Thank you. Good morning, Marybeth. First, I always want to say, give people their flowers while you can. You and I have actually followed each other on LinkedIn, and I just want to say thank you personally. I told Geneva this when I knew that you were going to be coming on. When I was working on my dissertation at Jackson State in the executive Ph.D. program, I came across this wonderful woman here, Marybeth's research. And I think one night it was 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I just like, where does she come from? Because you saved my life. And anybody who worked on a dissertation, you know that this is, you're losing your mind at some point. But I just want to say thank you so much for your research and everything you've done for HBCUs. But I do have a question.
Yes.
In this current climate that we have, where everybody's DEI-ing going crazy, dropping their programs and working with, corporations and foundations that have kind of changed their, their thought processes and surrounding DEI. What have you found, or strategies or things that, to kind of start those conversations for companies that have, decided to do away with their programs? And if you have any tips or...
I do. Well, first of all, Derek, I just want to say thank you so much for those kind words. I really, really appreciate that. I love working with students who are working on their dissertations. So feel free to reach out, I know that you're done at this point, but feel free to always reach out. And I'm glad that my work could be helpful. And I did want to say, people always thank me for my work related to HBCUs, but I want to say that I am so grateful for being able to do work related to HBCUs and how wonderful HBCUs have always been to me. So I really appreciate that. Okay, so your question is such a good one. And here is what I will say about this. I think that in some cases, there are times where we may be forced to change language, okay? but that does not mean we need to change the goal. And I think one of the best ways to get funding right now is to focus on workforce development. There is enormous federal funding out there for workforce development. There are also a lot of foundations and corporations interested in workforce development. So workforce development, you know what that means to me? Making sure that we have the best and the strongest and the most diverse workforce that we can. And so I have seen a lot of people sort of turning to workforce development. I think you can turn to community empowerment. You can turn to economic empowerment. I mean, HBCUs are amazing at economic empowerment. In fact, we know that HBCUs are better than almost anyone at economic mobility when it comes to students, right? We have evidence, we have quantitative evidence. And if people give people a hard time, all you have to do is say, well, it was a researcher at Harvard. I thought Harvard was the best, right? And when people are always saying that. So it's, you know, it's Raj Chetty at Harvard. He's done all of this work. And then plus like our center, UNCF has done some, the American Council on Education, that shows that HBCUs are economic mobility powerhouses. Frame your work in economic mobility, you know, community engagement, I would say workforce development. I would also, here's another area where there's a lot of money that HBCUs are not going after, and that's in areas like registered apprenticeship. Okay, so those are areas where you can get a degree and a job. You get paid. Like Alabama A&M has this amazing program that is a master's degree in social work that is a registered apprenticeship. So you get a full-time job as a social worker. You're getting your degree, your master's degree, and you know you're getting credit while you're going along, and you get all that experience. And normally the company hires you after you graduate, right? So there is a lot of money out there for that. That's another area that you can go after. And not only does federal money, is there federal money, but there are corporations and foundations interested in that topic. With workforce development, there are individual donors interested in that. Lots and lots of people want to make sure that people are employed in their communities. So those are areas you can go after. I will say one thing, don't give up, okay? And not that you're going to, but don't give up, okay? Because we do not want to be on the wrong side of justice. Don't give up. There are ways to get at the goals that we have, despite when people are pushing against us. And there is nobody who knows that in this country more, I think, than African Americans and Black colleges. You know, that's why you have the phrase, I'll find a way or make one, right? Which I learned a long time ago, like 25 years ago, and I can always use whenever I'm feeling bowled over or powerless. I think about all the people who I have written about, read about, who have inspired me. I'll find a way or make one. So just, that's the way I would say that.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Skip, did you want to come off mute to ask your question?
Yes, can y'all hear me?
Oh, the audio is a little distorted.
I don't know if my mic is working too good.
Okay. Then I'll go ahead and ask it on your behalf. Don't worry about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So Skip asked in the chat, do you have any thoughts about using the current political volatility to create a sense of urgency for donors to donate to an HBCU?
I do. So one of my mentors, her name is Wanda Blanchett, and she once told me, never waste a crisis. And that is some of the best advice I have ever received. And I never would have thought about it that way. And so as this has all been happening, I have been thinking to myself, how am I going to not waste a crisis? Because for me, this is a crisis. Okay. I don't know about all you. I'm thinking it's also a crisis. It's a crisis. So I would do everything you can to ensure, because there are lots of people worried, for example, about Black communities, right? There are lots of people worried about immigrant communities. There are lots of people worried about a variety of different marginalized communities. So HBCUs can come out and really show how they are the places that support these communities, not just Black communities, because they support Black communities, but HBCUs are doing so much that a lot of people sometimes I think people don't realize. Like one thing I always tell people is how HBCUs have the most diverse faculty in the country. That's a data point, by the way. And that is really, really powerful, because if I'm a student and I go to an HBCU, I end up with an amazing experience of having a diverse faculty that mirrors the country, right? Which most people don't end up with that, because as we know, 76% of faculty at majority institutions are white. So what I would say is I would lean into all the good that HBCUs do. I would, if I'm talking to funders, I would say, here are the things that we are facing in this current situation. Here's our track record. We need to keep doing what we're doing. I'd rely on that economic mobility data and show how HBCUs not only built the Black middle class, but are continuing to build the Black middle class, okay? And then I would lean into that. I think that's completely fine to do that. And I would be doing it. I would be telling the story. You do not want to be quiet. You do not want to be silent, because what happens when people are silent? Their rights are taken away. They're we end up not having what we deserve. And so I think that's incredibly important. And I would lean into it. And I'm going to give you an example of something real quick. The other day, I was contacting somebody who's given me, operating money for about almost 15 years. And I contacted them and I asked them for another operating grant. And they said to me, tell me what you're facing. Tell me what minority serving institutions are facing. Tell me about your losses. Okay, tell me what you're up against. Don't hide that. I don't think there's any reason not to say, here's what we're up against. I think that's really important. And they also asked me to communicate that to any minority serving institutions that I was interacting with. So, and that was a major funder who said, tell us the story. We need to hear it, and our board needs to hear it.
Great. So we have about 4 more minutes. So I'm just gonna ask the questions that are in the chat. So Linda Tucker asked, what are your thoughts, Dr. Gasman, about donor advised funds, and if the fundraising approach you just shared applies to working with donor advised funds?
Okay, so I'm just going to use myself as an example. I set up a donor advised fund where I give out scholarships every year. I would definitely, I'm not sure if you're asking if, as a person who set up the fund, if I would be persuaded. I would. If you're asking if I'm trying to see the perspective that you're asking it
Yeah,
from.
as a supplement, yeah, so that might be helpful.
Okay.
Linda,
Okay.
are you on? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I was asking from the perspective of working with donor advised funds managers who are working on behalf of their clients to
Yeah.
give to charitable causes. Thank you.
Yes, I would. Okay, so as an example, if an institution were to come to me and say, let's just say this happened. So usually I give out like 5 scholarships a year. And if someone came to me and to the person who manages my fund and said, would you be willing to give all 5 of these to this particular, let this institution like create this so that one institution could benefit from these, and then because I'm allowed to pick who they go to, right? As long as I'm not unethical about it. And there was a really good story around that. Like, for example, if someone came to me from Fisk University and asked me to support those young people in that rocket program, I'd be willing to do that because I was on that campus. I saw that rocket program. I've seen all the videos, and I will tell you that that professor posts those all over the place. And talks about it all the time. In fact, anytime he gives a talk, he always opens with a little story of his rocket program. So yes, I would do that. I don't know if everybody would respond that way, but I think most people respond to a really good story, and also a story where you can back it up with some data. So I would. I mean, I think I've also engaged donor advised funds, like an advisor, and I've used pretty much the same approach. Yeah. I would. And you know, there are so many donor advised funds out there that we forget about, and they have to give out that money. You have to give out the money. So otherwise you got the IRS after you. Yep.
Thank you for that answer. So unfortunately, we only have about 1 minute left, so we won't be able to get to the remaining questions in the chat today. But as you heard, Dr. Gasman said reach out. So if you wanted to direct those questions to her either on social or excuse me, another way, please feel free to do so. So we're just going to move on to the last slide so that we can wrap up for today's presentation in today's webinar. So again, we thank you all for being here and for taking your time out to listen to Dr. Gasman's presentation. And hopefully you got some valuable tips. It sounds like you did, and I sure did from the UNCF's perspective. So really appreciate you all for being here. If you are a member of CFRE or if you have the certification for being in today's presentation, you get 1 CFRE continuing education credit. So if you're logging into the site in order to upload all of your credits, you'll be able to search for today's presentation title on the CFRE site in order to add those points to your bank. Again, we hope that you are able to complete our evaluation form. Christine has put it in the chat so that you can give us some feedback about today's presentation and as well as what you'd like to see moving forward. And then we hope that you will continue the conversation on LinkedIn and follow us on LinkedIn. So you can see the bit.ly link there is TLC LinkedIn. So if there's nothing else, we really appreciate your time today, and we hope that you will join us next month on April 25th for the next session for TLC or for Fundraising Firesides, where we'll be joined by Dr. Tia Tyree from Howard University. She will be continuing a conversation on storytelling, but storytelling from the lens of social media. So we really hope that you will join us for that presentation as well. And please invite your colleagues and your friends that are also in the fundraising space to join you as well. So thank you all for your time today and have a lovely day.